Hey, how's it going? This is going to be a quick little review of Lightroom CC if you bought it as a subscription, Lightroom 6 if you bought it standalone, specifically about the new performance improvements that Adobe baked into the new version of Lightroom. So this came out about a week ago, Lightroom 5 2013 product, and April 21st, 2015, about 6 days ago. That's when this new version came out. So we have a lot of new features. You're going to see, videos popping up like this one or articles, and it's all going to be about this page. So if you really want the original source, you can look at all the new features. The ones that people have been most excited about are the HDR and panoramas, which aren't new by themselves because Photoshop has always been able to do that, but doing them in Lightroom is new. This video is going to focus specifically on the performance aspect. So what that does is put it on the computational load on the graphics processing unit, or GPU. And the question I want to answer here is which processes are on the GPU and which processes are on the CPU. I've looked a lot online and on YouTube at different places, and I can't find this specific piece of information. I'm a big computer nerd. I also love photography and use Lightroom a lot, but I've noticed that the overlap between those two traits in a person doesn't happen that much, and I think that might be the reason why there's not that much info on this. So I'm going to just take it on myself and try to share. So I've done some testing already. Facial recognition is all on the CPU. I'll show a little bit of that. I'm not going to look at these other things on the new features, but if you want to learn more about those things yourself, the best source I can recommend is Julianne Cost's blog. Julianne Cost is the highest level of certification for Photoshop and Lightroom. She's an evangelist, and she's very good. She explains things very well. She presents information in a manageable, easy to digest way. This is the page she made on the new Lightroom product. It goes over facial recognition, high dynamic range, panorama, improved Lightroom slideshows, and then this is a great video that I recommend, Hidden Gems in Lightroom CC. She goes through showing how Adobe took previously very annoying tasks and made them a little bit better with this new release. If you use Lightroom a lot, I think you'll appreciate the content there. Before I jump into all the testing and whatnot, we'll just point this page out. If you want to ask yourself, can I run this new GPU acceleration to make things faster? This long article basically says, yes, if you have a reasonably new computer. So there we go. Things I'm going to go through in this order is global develop, local develop, zoom and pan, crop, HDR compilation, panorama compilation, navigating the grid or library view, and facial recognition. And now, what do I mean by global and local develop? The two kinds of develop that there are in the develop module. I'll just pull up Lightroom and show you what I'm talking about. Dive right into it. It says sign in required, but then it lets me not sign in. I just want to get rid of that. If anybody knows how, please tell me. So let me just pick a photograph, maybe from my recent Iceland trip. And it doesn't, I actually don't want a photograph that's been edited. I just want a regular plain old raw that hasn't really had any touch up. So I'll pull this up. I'll explain what this graph is in just a minute. And I'm just going to distinguish between the two different kinds of developing in the develop module. So you have the global adjustments and you have the local adjustments. Global adjustments are here: basic tone, curve, colors, split toning, detail, lens corrections, effects, camera calibration. And then local adjustments are brush, radial filter, gradient filter, red eye reduction, spot removal, and crop. So local is just going to affect a spot on the photo, and then global is going to affect the whole photo. So that's what I mean by these things, and I'll get to them in a second. How am I going to test all this stuff? Well, I'm going to have a GPU monitor. Let me actually get rid of this second No, I'll leave that for now. So a GPU monitor, this is going to tell me the activity on the processor, the graphics processor. This is how much RAM or video RAM the graphics processor is using. Similarly, I also have the same sort of statistics pulled up for the central processing unit, the CPU. Let me set it to a default view. This is probably what you'll see when you pull it up. If you don't know how to pull it up, it's super simple. Control-Shift-Escape on your keyboard will pull up here. Then you go to the Performance tab, click on CPU, right-click on the graph, go to Change Graph to Logical Processors, and it'll show you all the processors. If you have a processor like mine, you'll see 12 different processors on here because that's how the system recognizes the processor. This is a fairly high-end processor. It's not the fastest in the Intel lineup, but it's just about the fastest. So, you know, we won't have any bottlenecks with this. The same story goes for the graphics processor. It's not the fastest card that there is, but it was the fastest card a year ago. It's a 780 Ti. That's part of the GTX lineup. And I'm pulling these up to show how the load will differ. If you have a CPU load, you're going to see a load on the CPU only. If you have a GPU load, you're going to see activity on the GPU, but you'll also see a little bit on the CPU. That's because info has to travel from the memory, from the disk and the memory through the CPU to get to the GPU. So that's the point of that is on a GPU task, you'll see activity on both CPU and GPU. If you have a CPU task, you're only going to see activity on the CPU. So that's what we're looking for. What do I mean? Well, let me show you an example. This is a graphics stress test just to see if your graphics cards are working right. And I'll just run it. So you have a super intensive graphic here. We have two kinds of graphics. You have the flag and then the sparkly things. Those are special effects, physics. Everything else is on the main graphics processor. While it's running, we see that we're using 20 to 25% of the CPU, and it's only using it to the extent required to send information over to the graphics processor. And this is a very efficient use right here. You have full utilization of the graphics processor. More so than you have of the central processor. So you have the graphics processing on the graphics processor. That's a great efficient use. But we probably won't see that on Lightroom. The GPU acceleration just came out. Plus, this program we're using here, this MSI Combustor, that's a program specifically designed to run efficiently on these kinds of setups for graphics testing, 3D applications. This Lightroom is made for developing and organizing photos, so we're not going to expect that level of efficiency. But if we have any move away from the CPU, it's going to be a good thing. So that's what you expect to see. Let's jump right into it. I'll go back to this image that we have, and I'll look at the first thing that I'm testing. We have global develop. So let's go back here. I'll change the full screen mode so I can see Lightroom, the CPU usage, and the GPU usage at the same time. So we're starting preset. This is the image with nothing done to it. Just a raw image. I'll make this as big as I can get it. Actually, I'll make it just as big as I can get it because it's better to see a bigger image, isn't it? So there we go. I'm going to make this a difficult process, so I'm just going to kind of arbitrarily assign everything besides the exposure. So I'm just going to swing this. The first thing I notice is that it's very responsive. If you notice, it's moving as soon as I move my mouse. And it's also spiking up the GPU. Something like this is not going to be as intensive as the last graphic with 3D that we saw. But if we get anywhere above like 3 or 4%, it's using the GPU for sure. It takes a certain percentage just to maintain the desktop and to see the mouse move, but maybe 2%, 3% to do that. If I go beyond that, get 5 to 10% or more, this is definitely a GPU task. So that's great. We see in the Basics tab, we see GPU acceleration. In the tone curve, let's see if we see the same thing. Yep, and we're getting up to 7, close to 10%. Let me make this more difficult on the processing. So yeah, this is also GPU accelerated. Let me go ahead and reset that adjustment. And then I'll go down to the color. We'll see how this fares. It's actually getting up to 15% on the GPU. A lot of usage on the CPU also, although I'm not seeing what this is actually doing in the image. The red might not be that prominent. Yellow will be. No? Blue for the sky? Oh yeah. Okay, so this is something you could visually track. That shows that it's doing the calculations honestly in the background, even if there's no color to represent on it. Maybe that could be made more efficient. But next, we have split toning, detail. Detail tab was the most computationally intensive tab because of noise reduction and sharpening. Let's zoom in, and we can look at. There's the grainy noise. We'll turn this color. We'll turn this color noise reduction on, and I can see it's kind of blocky. It's not jumping. Let me make it more obvious. So grainy, smooth. It's kind of going in steps. You can see it's not that fast. The GPU is staying at around 3-4%. It's not really getting used, and then we got 50% usage over here of the CPU. It's definitely a CPU task. Same for sharpening. That's unfortunate. Whatever. We know that that's not going to be. You're going to have to take that in consideration. And if you want your images to go fast, I would say do the noise reduction last, because if you turn the detail tab up and then go do other things, well, it's still responsive if you use the other tabs. I don't know. You can play with that. That's not the point of this video. Let me move down to lens corrections. This one was super slow because it was doing an obviously graphical task on the processor. So let's look at the distortion tab. Whoa, that is smooth. It was never this responsive, and that's clearly going on the GPU, above 12% there. Let me just make this kind of difficult on it to I'll just change kind of everything about the photo. That's interesting. I note that it's using the CPU a lot more and the GPU the same. So maybe it's just having to send more information to the GPU because these sliders are in places. Who knows? So that lets us move on to the next thing. We could say this is definitely on the GPU with the exception of detail. So let me just add that in here. Insert. Oops. Insert below. Detail tab. That's on the CPU. So now I'm going to go over to the local adjustment. So let's go into this brush. I'll just try painting the word test on the image, and we'll see what happens after we make this difficult. I'll just change all these values here. Actually, let me leave the sharpness in this alone. So without the sharpness, how far are we getting on the CPU and the GPU? Let's see. It's not using the CPU. I mean the GPU, it's using a quarter of the CPU to do that. And if I turn the sharpness down and the noise reduction up, then we start using half of the CPU. So that's more than twice as intensive just because we turned these two things on. But that nonetheless means the brush is CPU bound. Let's delete that. Move on to the radio filter. I'll put this here. I'll use the new brush feature. If you want to see how this works, you can go to Julian Cost's blog that I pointed out earlier. And I'll just get rid of the things, parts of it that I don't want to affect. I'll just limit it roughly to the church. And then, again, make it as difficult as possible. Turn off the overlay. And then we have another CPU bound task. We got 60-something% up there, and not really anything on the GPU. So there's that. I bet you we're going to get the same story with this, but let's just go ahead and test it anyway. I'll write something like test inside of this filter. Make it difficult. Turn off the overlay and see what we get. Yep, nothing on the GPU, bunch on the CPU. Now let's check spot removal. I'll just create a bunch of spots. And you can see this is not instant. I'm clicking and these tabs are switching a few seconds later. So we're getting high CPU usage. We're not getting anything on the GPU. Clearly a CPU task. I've reset that. Now let's check crop. Ah, super smooth. We're seeing above 10% GPU, and we're seeing CPU activity. So this is awesome because cropping on Lightroom 5 and earlier was a pain after we had a lot of adjustments because it was so slow. Nicely done, Lightroom. Do I have crop on here? So under local adjustments, because it's in that menu, I'll just insert a row below to say crop GPU. Very nice. Next, I'm going to go down to, did I skip one? Oh, local develop, that's on CPU, with the exception of crop. Zoom and pan. So let's go over to this. I'll zoom in and I'll pan. And what are we getting on the CPU? We're getting activity in the CPU, but if you notice that this is getting higher than normal, I'll make it a little bigger so that I can use more graphic. Yeah, this is getting it above 10% to move a bigger image like this. So this shows scaling with more pixels. If you have a very high resolution screen like the new 5K Dell, or I guess if you're on the Mac, the new iMac with 5K, you'll see that. And it's an interesting question whether the mobile GPU inside of the iMac will be able to accelerate this efficiently on a 5K display. I would guess that it's 50-50, but what do I know? I'm just a doctor. I'm not a doctor. So let's go to the next thing. We have zoom and pan. That's definitely a GPU task. Good. Oh, I already had crop on there. Can I delete this cell? Shift up. Okay. Okay. HDR. Let's go ahead and make an HDR. I just gotta find one. I'll pull up the CPU thing. Make the thumbnails bigger so I can see what the hell's going on. And this looks like, yeah, this is the 5 image HDR here. So let's go ahead. If I right click on after selecting, I can go to this, but I love keyboard shortcuts, Control H, so I'll just use it. And now it's generating an HDR preview. Well, it should be. It looks like it didn't take with these 5 photos. Let's look to other 5 photos. Here's a 5 photo set. Let's try this one and see if it likes it better. So I'll select them, press Control H. Okay, creating preview. This is not the final file. It's going to make a raw in the final image, but it's doing a little bit of the CPU. It looks like it jumps to kickstart the process, and then it runs sort of as a background process, which is weird because it's not like you're doing other things while this is going on. You're just sitting here staring at the progress bar. Look at all the CPU potential and GPU potential just not getting used. Well, I guess we'll wait. This is awkward, Adobe. One thing to note, we were using over 10 gigs to get that up just the preview. So let's merge to get the final file. We have a status indicator, 35% on the CPU. It looks like that's a CPU task. The GPU is not doing anything. I canceled it because I don't want the image. So HDR, unfortunately, CPU. Yikes. Why am I spazzing out on the keyboard? There we go. Now let's move on to panorama. Let's find a pano. Maybe I'll go back up. Is yes, yeah, I think that's a pano. These 4 images. So pano is Control M. Let's just Control M. Pull up the CPU task manager. So we're seeing the same behavior here, like an initial spike and then low usage. And I'll just press merge to see. Creating the final image. That's shooting up on the CPU 60-something%, and then dropping as a background process. I understand what they're doing with this background process. You might want to do more panels or more HDRs, but at the same time, but maybe it would be good if they can detect how much processing power you have. Like, I'm not using 85-75% right now, and I'm not using 95% on the GPU. Like, slower computers might need that, but what about people who have stronger computers? Whatever. So we found out just now that panorama is CPU. I keep doing that. CPU task. Let's move it into grid navigation. I'll make this a little bigger. Make the thumbnails a little smaller to show as many of them as possible. I'll go to all photos to show as many photos as possible. And then I'll just kind of go around. It's really blocky. Just by seeing it go dut dut dut, you can tell it's a CPU task. Also because the GPU is not really doing anything. And it appears that the CPU is doing a lot. 50%. Seems like the disk is doing a lot right now too. Something running in the background. Dynamic disk media server. Huh. Well, whatever. Yes, so we have a grid navigation, a CPU. Finally, facial recognition. Let's go over to all photos, and I'll press the O key to go to the facial recognition thing. Pull up my cousin. Just had a baby. She's all happy. And right now it's finding similar faces. That's a it's like a CPU task. It's going above 12%, only minimal on the GPU. Are there any other faces that are her? That's her. This is going really slowly. I could see that this would be incredibly painful because it's doing that as a background task. Like, it's only using a small percentage of the CPU, none of the GPU. So when I say to the computer no, how do I say no? Right? I don't know. Well, I don't know. I would just guess there should be a thumbs down and a thumbs up, but there's only a thumbs up. Whatever. Here she is. I'll press yes on this one, and then the photo disappears. It should be reorganizing everything over there and letting me interact with the other photos, but it's not while it's finding similar faces. That can be painfully slow in a large library, I'm sure. Well, let me close Lightroom. Oh, it's still doing things. And go back to here. We have facial recognition. So we got GPU acceleration on 3 tasks of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Of the 9 I identified. That's pretty good for a start. I do have to say, like, this was a very slow program all around, and now it's only a very slow program in these ways, but it's incredibly responsive in these ways. So I hope over time we'll start seeing everything shift. But hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if it was. Have fun in Lightroom.